Litigation.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
So here, what we have here is Mr. Richard Hofman. He's an attorney, real estate attorney, and he's very knowledgeable as far as the foreclosure process and what families can do to what options they have. And so he's going to talk about 10 minutes, 10 minutes about the subject, and hopefully we can learn quite a bit. And you know, he's here. This does not mean he's endorsing me or I'm endorsing the services, but we're both. You know, he's a real estate. He's a professional that I really respect his knowledge on the subject.
Hi. So my name is Richard. I've been practicing for about 25 years. I'm also happens I'm a real estate broker too. So I kind of seen all the way around any real estate transaction from construction through sale. And I've represented probably everybody involved in that process. So hopefully I know, I figure I have a pretty good feel for what's going on. I like to speak to consumers because obviously foreclosures are a everlasting problem. It seems like it's been going on for, ever, because it has been going on for a long time by now. It's about 4 to 5 years. It's a long time. And not done, still going on. And as long as people are out of work or are not fully employed, it's going to still happen to some degree, hopefully less, but still happen to some degree. There's people that know the markets better than I, and they judge how long it's going to take for the market to come back. It's still going to take a while, but I think it's improving, so we're kind of on the brighter side of things. In the meantime, people still lose their homes, and they're looking for ways of kind of salvaging the situation. And they're at a position where they're at risk. They literally, they have their home, they're about to be kicked out of their home, and somebody comes along preying on them and trying to offer assistance and also to make a buck. So there's no problem making a buck if you're offering help, but a lot of people are really not offering help, they're just making a buck. So I kind of wanted to go over a few things and a few options you might have, and more just kind of like some basic thoughts I have for how you protect yourself. And to me, like, rule number one is, if you, let's say you have a problem or you know somebody has a problem, they come to you and they tell you a scenario and what they've been promised sounds too good to be true, then it is too good to be true. And you just have to judge your instincts. If somebody comes with a proposition to you and it just says, wow, and there have been, for example, there have been attorneys who have marketed to homeowners in foreclosure that if they went ahead and sued the lender, that not only would they get their house for free, but they would get damages from the bank. And maybe that sounds silly to you that you would automatically know that that's false, but for a lot of people, especially under the gun and the stress, it sounds like a pretty good proposition. I mean, at least worth thinking about. And a lot of people did fall for those kind of things. So really the first thing is, you really have to be careful in this environment. A lot of people looking to make money, a lot of people making false promises. So I'm not saying there's a lot of people aren't there that can help you, because there are people that help you too, but you really just have to be alert. And if it feels bad, then you just got to walk away, and you trust yourself on that. So there are a bunch of things you can do that are options if you end up in a situation where your house is in foreclosure or you know somebody's house in foreclosure. And I kind of want to just go briefly through them. You can get a loan modification, and I don't know if, basically what that is, you're changing the terms of your loan. Usually the interest rate will drop, and that means that your unaffordable payments now might be affordable. And I've done some loan modifications myself, and they're, for an average human being, it's impossible to do. The banks aren't set up really to. What happened is the banks were forced to provide programs to people. I don't think they were going to do anything voluntarily, and they set up a bunch of programs. One of them is a loan modification program, but they did that at the same time they were cutting their staff and trying to save cash. So they basically went from a certain level of staff to less staff, and then they had 2 million files come in. So the way they were set up, it was impossible for them to administer the files. They really didn't care, because after a while, people get burnt out. You know, you try to get something resolved and you call the bank 19 times and they don't return your call, or you literally send in like a package 7 times and they don't recall having it or don't have it. But those kind of things happen. So as a result, a lot of people got burnt out and they kind of dropped out of the process. And in the end, where they might have given or estimated they were going to give 5 million loan mods, they gave like 500,000, something like that. And of those, a lot of people weren't able to do those, so a lot of those kind of fell out too. So the banks, on one hand, they were showing that they were assisting. On the other hand, they really weren't assisting. They were making it as difficult as possible. And I hope nobody here is a banker, so I'm not trying to, okay. If I say anything you disagree with, feel free to jump in. And you know, obviously the banks differ too. So I'm talking about the largest banks. Generally, the largest banks have the most influence. So he's probably from J.P. Morgan or something.
He's an employee. He's not an
Bank of
executive.
America. All right. And I happen to, by the way, my office was across the street from Countrywide in Calabasas, so I was familiar with that from the early start. But anyway, that's my opinion in terms of the loan mod process. But what happened is a lot of people got burnt out. It's still ongoing. It's better. You know, today it's better, but it's still a bear, and I still think it's understaffed. And but if you're able to do it, it's a great resolution because you can stay in your house, and you have a payment that's affordable, and so that's a great resolution to me. And I've heard that in the future, in the near future, and I don't know what it will be governed by, that the modification rules may be relaxed to some extent, where they might apply to rental properties, and the incentive provided to the lenders to reduce the principal of the loans will be increased. So that should encourage loan modifications to be done. So I'm optimistic on that because if more properties that are resolved in some fashion, ultimately the closer we are to curing the entire issue. That doesn't mean that housing prices are going to be great, but we're looking to get a real market in place. Because once we have a real market, then you have buyers and sellers, you have appreciation, and kind of we're back to a new reality. So the loan modification area can be a really good resolution, but you should know in California you're not supposed to pay fees for a loan modification until it's done. So the trick here is what somebody will do is you'll call them up and they won't charge you for a loan modification, but they'll charge you for some type of investigation or a securitization audit or a forensic review. They'll call it a lot of different things. And it's a way of them being able to charge for the loan modification without calling it a loan modification. Because they'll do a lot of the same things anyway. They'll get the same documents that they will eventually use for the loan modification, but they have to kind of generate income. So, if somebody calls you up and they try to get you into a program like that, you should maybe remind them that, you're not supposed to charge for loan modification fees, and you probably shouldn't do business with a company like that. Obviously, the other area that's a way of resolving things is a short sale arena. And short sale means you're getting rid of your house for less than is owed. Sometimes there's tax consequences, so you should check with whoever you're involved with in terms of your tax issues. And in terms of short sales, again, the issue is the banks have to decide what the property is worth for them to sell, which ends up being an issue. Because obviously there's usually the homeowner or somebody associated with the homeowner wants a lower price and the bank wants a higher price. If in fact, as I've heard, that the loan modification rules are going to change, the short sales rules will probably change so that the incentives to the lenders will be increased, so there probably will be room for the values to be decreased, and more short sale transactions will probably go through also. So I'm expecting that to happen before election time. There's a process called an independent foreclosure review, which is a new process that was set up in mid-2011. The largest banks and servicers agreed not to engage into certain foreclosure practices in the future, in April of 2011. They didn't admit to committing the improper practice, but they agreed not to do it in the future. And as a result of that, a claims organization was established, and anybody who was in foreclosure in 2009, 2010, and we'll see if it's going to apply in 2011, could basically file a free claim to this organization, be sent out to an outside vendor, and they would evaluate the process, how the foreclosure was handled, if the borrower was damaged in any way, and they theoretically have the right to award damages. They could theoretically undo a sale or anything else. There's no limitation. It's brand new because it just started the very end of 2011, and I don't think they've evaluated one claim yet. So we don't know what they're going to do, but it's an avenue, and whether, it's for something like that, even though it's free, it's basically like a legal claim. So you should have somebody who knows what they're doing in filing it. It's non-appealable, so it's like a one-shot deal. But, as opposed to if you're going to sue your bank or this way, I think it's a cheaper way of suing your bank, if you wanted to do it. If you thought that they didn't help you properly and they misled you and a bunch of things, if you're going to do it, it's probably a much more effective way for everybody concerned, from the consumer and from the bank. And so anyway, but we don't know how it's gonna turn out because it's brand new. But it's a nice little remedy that might exist. Another option, of course, is, and this is a popular option, is people sue the banks. Now, it's okay, in my opinion, if there are grounds for suing the bank, then that's okay. But realistically, especially in California, most lawsuits against banks, whatever bank it is, will ultimately be thrown out at some point. Exceptions, there are exceptions, but that's kind of the general rule. So if people understand that they may have a valid claim, because some practices that the banks have undertaken, in my opinion, are improper. But for the court purposes, the courts don't think it's enough, or they impose other conditions. So I think if the bank handles a foreclosure improper, then you do have a right to proceed against the bank. But if somebody comes thereafter and tells you you're going to get the property free and you're going to get a bunch of money from the bank, that's kind of a misleading statement. If they were told that, well, you might win, you might lose, during the proceeding, the bank probably is not going to foreclose, and that's kind of like the baseline, then I'm okay with that, as long as everybody is on the same page and know what's going on. So there is litigation that's ongoing, usually one homeowner versus their lender and the loan servicer, and a lot of times these loans are chopped up and sold, so there'll be a trust that actually will own the loan. They end up being very complicated transactions, which ended up being part of the problem that the recession was so great, because the loans got chopped up. And this is not the bank's fault per se. This is just kind of what the business was. The loans got chopped up and they kept on being sold, and you created a much bigger product. So if things went south, that you had a much bigger exposure. And that's kind of what happened. Not just banking, but the insurance on the loans ended up being a problem. AIG went out of business, or whatever AIG is at this point. So there's litigation.
Actually, they're back.
Yeah,
making a lot of money.
Yeah, making a lot of money now, and they got bailed out. They were, got a lot of money.
And their stock is doing better. Doing very well.
Yeah, if you were there and stayed, you did fine. But there was a ton of money, and we really don't know what the future exposure is, because there's still a lot of instruments that exist that haven't been called. Because at least in the insurance instruments, they estimate there might be $300 or $400 trillion of instruments, and that's more money than obviously exists on the planet, and nobody really knows what's going to happen as to those instruments, or if any of them are going to be called, or what the liability is, whatever. But anyway, as to litigation, I think it's okay as long as everybody knows what it is. And there are occasions, of course, where, and I've seen it, where the instruments are, what the facts are such that the foreclosure should not have occurred or shouldn't occur. I'd say that's the minority of the cases. I think the majority are that notwithstanding whatever the problem is, that the foreclosure is eventually going to happen. There are other alternatives, and again, just so you're aware of all the alternatives. The other alternative is you can file a bankruptcy. So what does a bankruptcy do? A bankruptcy is good in this situation, is if the property is worth, let's say, $400,000, and you have a first of $500,000, and you have a second for $200,000, then you could file a bankruptcy and you'd be able to get rid of that second completely. So in that kind of circumstance, if you were able to get rid of the second and then be able to do a loan modification on the first, perhaps get a capital reduction on the first, then the property's at market value, you have a loan you can pay, and then, So in California, this is an oddball because California is usually a pretty pro-consumer state. But the state courts and the federal courts the same way are not really pro-consumer on this issue, and I think it's just a public policy issue that they figure if everybody who has a claim really filed an action, the courts could not handle it. So I really believe it's a straight public policy. If it's really bad, the courts will step in. Otherwise, most people don't get evicted from their home in 30 days. It takes quite a length of time. And I think that's kind of the accommodation was made. The courts are not letting people prevail, but they're not aggressively getting them out of the property, somewhere in between. Probably it's bad both ways, but that's kind of the practical approach. In bankruptcy court, there's more options. You have to file a bankruptcy, which a lot of people don't like to do, and which might restrict you. But on the flip side, if using the example, the numbers of the case where the second trustee is completely out of equity, it's a viable option. And those motions, they're called lien strip motions. They're generally granted in today's marketplace. So those are kind of the general options. And again, the most important is not to be fooled as to what you're doing. And if somebody asks you to kind of give them your opinion based on the same thing. And most importantly, if you're dealing with a lender, servicer, or anybody like that, keep a record of who you spoke to, when you spoke to them. As much as possible, document communication. That's by email, by letter, but do it that way. That way, there'll at least be a record, good or bad, and it will be much easier to resolve. Because most people don't. They don't keep track. And it might be 2 years down the line when they're thinking about, January of 2010, I spoke to whatever. It's just not possible. So this or any other issue that you really think is really significant, just as a matter of practice, keep track of days and people you speak with, because you will see at some point in time that will be a savior for you in some dispute you have. So anyway, I wish you all good luck, and I hope you're not in a position where your home's at risk. But if you can pass on the advice to somebody who's asking you, you're really helping out. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Any questions? Specific questions anybody may have?
Are you going to leave a business card?
Yeah, I'll leave a few.
So we can.
It'd be good. Thank you so much,
Sure.
Mr. Hoffman.
I have one.
There's a question there.
So if there's a person that has 2 loans or 3 loans and they cannot make the payments, they can actually go ahead and go bankrupt?
Yeah, be a Chapter 13 job.
Okay, so they can eliminate the second?
Yeah, any of the judges do the third too. If it was out of equity. Has to be completely out of equity. So even if there's like $1.50 of equity, then that's not out of equity.
Or consolidate the loans.
But listen, there's
a lot of people like that.
Yeah, there is a lot. Yeah, because
there's a lot.
almost anybody with a second that was made before 2008 is going to be upside down.
Yeah, and
By
no jobs.
But
Yeah,
how does that help on Chapter 13? Because even if you file, you still have to pay.
you have to pay what remains. You're going to get the second removed. So, and then you may be in a position also to negotiate deal with your lender on the first. That's in the end that's the hope. But if you remove the that debt, that second is like a, you know, a anchor.
Yeah.
Because you never can get any value out of the property. At least in your mind, you're thinking, property appreciates, but it's got to appreciate a lot to get rid of that second. But if you get that removed, then at least you have a shot. And then it's then it
Now
becomes
you have income coming.
yeah, then it becomes an asset again. You know, everybody relied upon their home as kind of retirement or whatever. That's how I grew up. You knew in the end you could always rely on your home or whatever as your savior. But now, for most people, they don't see their home the same way.
No, they cannot make the payments.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. It's really, you know, it's not an investment, and it's not an investment for most people because they've been scarred by the times.
Also, you know, we think about the boom times, you know,
Yeah.
when the prices were skyrocketing.
Absolutely.
People use their home as a piggy bank.
Absolutely.
They went ahead and took first, seconds to add to whatever, and then, you know, they're
No
not
question.
in the situation that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think, you know, there's a lot of people that everybody played a role in where we are today.
Yes.
So, you know, if you took the money out of your house and you were betting that the value was going to stay high, then you're part of the
We
problem.
lost.
You're part of the problem too, unfortunately.
Exactly.
But, you know, it doesn't really, yeah, you're part of the problem, but we're here and we have to deal with
And
it.
we have to deal with
And
it.
until the house, no, bottom line, until housing is resolved, that means construction's not resolved. And until construction is resolved, that means unemployment is not resolved. That's really kind of it.
Yeah.
So again, I'm a big proponent. Value is not important to me. The market is important.
Yeah.
We want a stable market. That's it. Once we have a stable market, then we'll see construction and start to come around because everything will make financial sense at that point in time.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope. Now I'm here to my view, obviously. I'm here to help consumers if they have problems, but ultimately for everybody. We just need a market so we can get back to business as usual.
Great job.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay.
To be done.
Thank you.
Thank you again.